And give the call to the honourable member for Cook.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to all those who have joined us here in the chamber today. I'm going to commence my final contribution to this place in the same way I began my first one, in acknowledging the Gweagal people of the Dharawal Nation of southern Sydney. A very special people, because they were the first to engage with Lieutenant James Cook on April 29, 1770, and that place in Kurnell is a very special place. We speak a lot of reconciliation in this place, as we should, and my experience of that place each and every year as we gather in a ceremony of reconciliation, I think speaks to the best spirit of that. And on that place, I spoke about in my first maiden speech here, my maiden speech in this place, that it was important that we recognised this site. And I'm so pleased that over the time I was here we were able to achieve that. And on that site now there is, artists call it an installation, others would call it a monument, some might call it a statue. You can call it whatever you like, but I know what it means. There is the totem of the Dharawal people, the whale, and it's beautiful. There are many other installations around the shore, but the one which is most striking as the tide comes in and laps on it and recedes is the skeleton of a whale. But it is also the skeleton of a ship like the Endeavour. And on each of the rings of that skeleton is inscribed the journals of Lieutenant James Cook. If you haven't been there, go there. It is a wonderful place to reflect on how two stories become one. And for me, that's what reconciliation has always been about with Indigenous people. We weave together the individual strands of individual Australians of so many different backgrounds and experiences, from our Indigenous peoples to the most recent citizens. Each strand unique, but together weaved as one. And for me, that site will always mean that. And it's wonderful to acknowledge it here today, and the artists and so many who made that possible. As was my practice as Prime Minister, I always, when acknowledging Indigenous Australians, I would also, in the same breath, acknowledge those men and women who served Australia in our defence forces in the past, those who serve now, for the simple reason that they are the providers of our freedom. And everything we have in this country, we owe to them. One of my early days, the member for Blackstone is here, we trekked together in the spirit of bipartisanship, Kokoda. He was a little quicker than me, still is. We trekked Sendarkin, we trekked the Black Cat track up there in northern Papua New Guinea, and they went on to also go to Gallipoli. And at the end of those treks we would stand together with the young people who were with us, and we'd hold hands and we'd face, whether it was at the Bamana Cemetery or in Leh or in Sandarkan or elsewhere, and we would hold hands, look at those tombstones and thank them, and commit our lives to live lives that would be worthy of their sacrifice. Incredibly moving. And we would say, they gave their tomorrows for our today. And so it is easy for us all in that spirit to acknowledge our Defence Forces, those who serve in them, and serve in them today, far from here and nearby, and simply say thank you for your service. Today is not an opportunity to run through a bullet point list of things. It is importantly an opportunity for me to simply express my thanks and appreciation and admiration for those who have made my service here in this place possible, and to pass on what I hope are some helpful reflections from my time here that may assist those who continue to serve. So let me begin with my thank yous. And firstly, and importantly, to my constituents in Cook. It has been my great privilege to have served you as your local member in this parliament for these past more than 16 years, where you have been kind enough to elect me on 6 separate occasions, successive occasions. I thank you for the tremendous and steadfast support you have provided to me and my family who join me here today during this time. Whatever was going on at the time, success, failure and everything in between, when I returned to the electorate, and particularly, and those who know the area will know what I'm talking about, as I would go up the rise of the Captain Cook Bridge and descend into God's country of itself, the Shire, I would feel a great sense of belonging. I would feel a great sense of reassurance and peace. All of us who live there know this. This is as much, though, about the people as it is the place. It is home, and always will be. Mine is a community that is unashamedly proud of our country, that deeply values family life and what it takes to live a life that keeps families together, that works hard. They take responsibility for themselves. They appreciate and respect both their own and others' good fortune, and they are generous to those around them, celebrating their successes or providing a hand up whenever and wherever it is needed. It is also a community that enthusiastically shares in supporting and maintaining the important community and social infrastructure that preserves our way of life. It is a community that does not leave it to others, including the government. Mine is a community that does not look for what it is owed, but what it can contribute, for how it can make a contribution, not take one, both nationally and locally. They are a community of patriots, and I am pleased to describe them as such in this place. Both locally and in my national roles, including as Prime Minister, I've always been guided by the strong local values of my community: family, community, small business, and what I described as the fair go for those who have a go. This is what makes the Shire and southern Sydney such a great place to live and raise a family, and there are plenty of quiet Australians who understand that as well. Ever since I was first elected, I've always seen it as my job to try and keep it that way, and I believe I've honoured that commitment. I particularly thank the myriad of community organisations and sporting clubs, school communities, volunteers, small businesses, church and charitable groups that make our local community, as they do all of our communities, so great and so resilient, including my beloved Sharks. These groups and organisations are the heart of our community, and I've always enjoyed the role I have played to support and enable them in their efforts, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve all together in our community over this time. I also want to thank my many local Liberal Party supporters and members, in particular Mike Douglas and Louise de Domenico, who was also on my staff, and my conference chairman and great friend Scott Briggs, for always keeping the local show on the road. A special thank you also to our neighbours and friends in Lillypilly, Port Hacking and Dolans Bay. You had to put up with more than most: cameras, security, traffic, the odd protest, home invader. So to Jamie and Anna, and to Joe, Chrissy and Stan, I look forward to continuing to return the favour of mowing your lawns for years to come. It will be quite some time before I settle that debt. A big thank you also, I'm sure Jenny would agree, to Rob and everyone up at the Lish. You know, as politicians, we know that we are the tip end of the spear. Yet behind us, there are so many we are supported by. They are incredible, dedicated, professional, intelligent, loyal, good-humoured, sacrificial, amazing people who, for reasons that I suspect never cease to amaze all of us, and it certainly humbles us, choose to commit themselves to the causes we have identified and seek to champion as members of this place, and when we have the opportunity in government. They become a family. They support one another. They form close and lasting relationships, and together embarking on one of the great seasons we did of our lives. I have been blessed in this area more than I could ever deserve. From my local office team in the Shire, especially to Julie Adams, to the incredible professionals who headed up and worked in my prime ministerial and ministerial offices, especially Dr John Kunkel, Phil Gaetjens and Anne Duffield, and my long-standing original staff, Letitia Wenlock and Gillian Lumbrigan, who is here today. The journey would simply have been impossible without you all, and all of those you ably led, and all who worked together in these causes, so many of whom are here today, and I thank them for being here. There are too many of you to mention all by name, and nor do I wish to injure your reputations by doing so. But I hope you all feel the full partnership of our service together and what we're able to achieve and contribute. Thank you. I also wish to thank all those who cared for me and my family over the years when I was Prime Minister, as the Prime Minister now would know. To our household staff at the Lodge and Kirribilli, led by the beautiful Trina Barry and the incomparable Adam Thomas, you provided a space for Jen, Abby, Lily, Buddy and Charlie and I to be a family. Thank you. To the members of my close protection team at the AFP over the years and who continue to look after us even on the odd occasion these days, thank you. And I want to especially mention Travis Ford and Jen McRae, who were terribly injured in the line of duty protecting me. In a terrible car accident in Tasmania. I will always be grateful for your sacrifice. When their colleagues rushed to them at the scene, their first words were, not knowing what had occurred, "Is the boss okay?" Thank you. And to Mick, I'll be in touch about that fishing trip we talked about, as we promised each other on the road on so many occasions. To my parliamentary and my ministerial and cabinet colleagues, with whom I served over the years, some gone from this place now, many still here, I want to thank you for your support and your dedication. As your leader, you gave me your best in some of Australia's most difficult times. I asked you to follow, and you did, and together we achieved an election victory that none thought possible, and we kept steady hands on the tiller during the greatest set of challenges that have confronted our nation since the Second World War. Thank you for your service. For the opportunities afforded to me by my party leaders over this time, to Brendan Nelson, to Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, thank you. To my now party leader, Peter Dutton, with whom I served in Cabinet through all the years of the coalition government, thank you for your respect, your loyalty, your support and consideration, especially that you've shown me as a ministerial colleague, as a Prime Minister and as an ex-PM in your party room. Jen and I both appreciate the kindness and generosity you and Kirribilli have shown to both of us and our family. For the great friendship, encouragement and afforded to me by some very special friends as colleagues, the Big Mac, my Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormick, Catherine. To Josh Frydenberg, who I was speaking with this morning, and my Deputy Leader and Treasurer, thank you, Josh. To Maurice Payne, to Greg Hunt, Michaela Cash, and good old Benny Morton, and Alex Hawke, who sits with me here today, keeping me entertained each question time. Still, there's plenty to entertain us. Thank you. And those who have gone from here, to Steve Irons and Stuart Robert, who I flattered with for many years, to Lucy Wicks and the incomparable Bill Heffernan, who I flattered with for the first 6 years and survived, and Louise Marcus, thank you. To the broader Liberal Party members and our supporters led by Andrew Hurst, to John Olsen and Nick Greiner, thank you. And to those who supported me from the public service as a Minister, Treasurer and Prime Minister, thank you. Especially for your service during the pandemic, which I extend to everyone in the public service who showed the true spirit of what public service was and sacrifice and dedication. So thank you to Phil Gaetjens, who's the head of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, but particularly thank you also to Professors Brendan Murphy and Professor Paul Kelly, who all became well-known figures, and General J.J. Frewen, thank you. And to General Angus Campbell and Greg Moriarty, thank you for all you did to help me secure AUKUS. When I left the job after the last election we lost, I remember saying to them, now please don't stuff it up, which they are not, together with the Minister for Defence. To the Prime Minister, to the Deputy Prime Minister and the members of your government, to Bill Shorten, We have contested fiercely in this place. I've had my wins and I've had my losses, but I wish you all well in your service in the national interest. Too often in this place, we confuse differences of policy with judgments about people's intent and motives. This is not good for our polity. We may disagree, but we need to honour the good intentions of all of us. I wish you well in your service, as I've said, and I especially want to thank you, Mr Speaker, for the special kindness and respect that you've shown to me in this place since the last election, and here again today. Also to the Prime Minister and your now new fiancée, Jodie. Congratulations on your engagement. Jenny and I wish you all the very best for your life together. At some point, this all ends. And while there are no hard feelings, I'll obviously be supporting my colleagues and Peter Duttoners to ensure that that day hastens sooner rather than later. But when it does, you will look around and Jodie will be there. And I can assure you, as Jen has been, it makes a world of difference. When I first entered politics, the former member for Parramatta, who many of us remember well, Julie Owens, gave new members some good advice at our orientation about making sure you did not neglect the friendships you had before you came. I took this advice very seriously. I'm even more pleased that my friends and family did. So thank you to our wonderful friends, and they're here today, to Karen and Adrian Harrington, to David Gazard, the Gazman, to Arthur and Ingrid Elias, to Bill and Ann Knock, to Peter Verwer, Scotty Briggs, who couldn't be here today, and Lynelle Stewart. We love you very much and appreciate you. To my Christian pastors, Brad and Alison Bonholm, to Mike and Val Murphy, Joel and Julia Bell, and Jock Cameron, and my brothers in Christ, Andrew Scipione, John Anderson, and Lloyd Thomas, who's here together with his wife Fee today. Thank you for your prayers, for your counsel and your encouragement. I also especially want to thank Bishop Antoine Tarabay and all of our Maronite brothers and sisters, of whom I've become an honorary Maronite, I think, in the years past, and especially to our dear friends Danny and Layla Abdullah, Bridget Saker and Craig McKenzie, who have taught us all what faith is really all about. As most people know, subject only to God, my family is the centre of my life, and at the very centre of our family is Jen. I cannot imagine life without her. I love you, Jen, and always will. That is the cross you have to bear. Your love has been my stay and strength. You are the other half of our joined soul, who by the grace of God brought Abby and Lily our miracle girls into our lives, who we celebrate and love. I thank Abby and Lily for their own sacrifices as they've grown, necessitated by having a father in public life. They are beautiful girls in every way, as you can see, and I could not be more proud of them as a father. They are our joy and our delight, and I am so pleased that we can now have the time that was necessarily denied us for so long. In preparing for this day, Abby and Lily suggested that I should play a type of Taylor Swift bingo. And I'm wearing the bracelet, by the way. Has ScoMo on it. And they said, by trying to work the names of every single Taylor Swift album into my remarks. Well, what's a dad to do? Here I go. It is true that my political opponents have often made me see red. Often when subjected to the tortured poets who would rise to attack my reputation. In response, I always thought it important to be fearless and speak now, or forever hold my silence and allow those attacks to become folklore. Ever since leaving university in 1989, this has always been my approach. My great consolation has always been my lover, Jen, who has always been there for me whenever I need her from dawn and beyond the many midnights we have shared together. See, I'm actually a true numismatic, after all. And I can assure you there is no bad blood, as I've always been someone who's been able to shake it off. anything for my daughters. I also want to thank, of course, Jen's mum, Beth, who's looking after the cat and the dog today, and Jen's late father, Roy, an amazing human being. For always being on my side, as well as Jen's siblings, Gary and Cecily, and all their families. Finally, I thank my mum, Marion, who's here, who was here with my late father today, John. Together, also, I want to thank my brother, Alan, of whom I'm extremely proud. My family, growing up, were the dominant example for my life. They taught me that life is about what you contribute, not what you accumulate. They taught me about the duty and dignity of public service. But beyond this, I would never have known God and my Saviour Jesus Christ if it was not for them. I can think of no greater gift. Okay, that's the emotional stuff done. You're not used to seeing that side of me. Having said my thank yous and expressed my appreciation, I would now like to reflect on just three things I've learned along the way that may help those dealing with the challenges of the future who continue in this place. The first of these is that without a strong economy, you cannot achieve your goals as a nation. All good government must start with nurturing a strong, innovative, dynamic, entrepreneurial, market-based economy. In the 1980s, we threw off the shackles of the federation institutions that Paul Kelly, who was here today, wrote about in The Uncertainty, that were holding our economy back. This led my generation into 30 years of economic change that, despite some missteps along the way, including a recession we had to have, produced the longest period of continuing economic growth that any nation in the modern world has known. And there have been strong contributions made to this achievement by both sides of politics, which I acknowledge, and always, though, with a Liberal and National support. As we entered the pandemic, I was pleased that after almost 6 years of painstaking fiscal effort, we had restored our budget to balance and maintained our AAA credit rating. This was achieved by focusing on economic growth and containing growth in public spending, which at the time our government had the lowest rate of growth in public spending of any Australian government for decades. This would prove vital in the years that followed. Having saved for a rainy day, it was now raining. It was pouring, and we had to respond. Australia would emerge with one of the lowest fatality rates from COVID in the developed world. When compared to the average fertility rates of the OECD countries, Australia's response saved more than 30,000 lives. We were described as the gold standard of COVID responses by Bill Gates at the Munich Security Conference, and the second most COVID-prepared nation by the Johns Hopkins Institute. This will always be to Greg Hunt's great credit, and all those he worked with, his eternal credit. It is also true that during the pandemic the rate of death by suicide actually fell and remained down in 2021. This was nothing short of an answer to prayer and the extraordinary efforts of our mental health workers, professionals and services. And I particularly want to acknowledge Professor Pat McGorry and Christine Morgan, who were incredible supports to me during that time. But our plan was not just about saving lives, but to save livelihoods as well. And this was achieved with Australia emerging with one of the strongest economies through COVID. Our historic economic response kept 700,000 businesses in business. It kept more than 1 million Australians in work. And despite these unpredicted outlays, Australia was one of just 9 countries to retain our AAA credit rating. Our response was timely, it was targeted, and it was temporary. And we responsibly retired measures as soon as it was prudent to do so, leading to an historic reduction in the actual budget deficit, with the budget even moving into structural surplus during COVID. And as Joss asked me to remind everyone this morning, an unemployment rate with a 3 in front of it when we left. JobKeeper and the myriad of economic supports designed by Josh and I with Matthias Cormann, and later Simon Birmingham, and the whole team at Treasury and the ATO, would have been fanciful had we not entered into this crisis with a tank that was full. We cannot take our economy for granted. Employers and businesses creating jobs is how you run a strong economy and put a budget into structural balance and keep it there. During my time in this place, I observed that many of the old partisan differences on economic policy have regrettably re-emerged. In 2019, we fought an election on this and we prevailed in our miracle election win. Looking forward, we must be careful not to reinstitutionalise our economy. Such an approach will only negate the capacity we have as a nation to deliver on the essentials that Australians rely on, crush entrepreneurial spirit and that wonderful spirit of small business, and leave us vulnerable in the face of new threats to our sovereignty. Which brings me to my second point. Those threats are there, and they're real. During my time in this place, and especially as Prime Minister, we have seen an end to the post-Cold War period of globalisation and the emergence of a new era of strategic competition, where our global rules-based order is being challenged by a new arc of autocracy. This arc of autocracy, which I referred to as Prime Minister, ranges from Pyongyang to Beijing, Tehran and Moscow, a chord of would-be regional hegemons who would prefer power to freedom and cared little for the price their own citizens pay to achieve their ends. For this reason, our government stood firm against the bullying and coercion of an aggressive Chinese Communist Party government in Beijing, who thought we would shrink when pressed. Indeed, we not only stood firm, but we worked with our allies, our partners and those in our region who wish to protect their own sovereignty to counter this threat to regional peace, prosperity and stability. AUKUS, the Quad, new trading and defence relationships, the first ever comprehensive strategic partnership of any nation with ASEAN, and others, including PNG, the Pacific Step-Up, all designed to protect our sovereignty and stand up for a global rules-based order that favours freedom, especially here in our own region in the Indo-Pacific. In this respect, I pay tribute to the work of Maurice Payne and Dan Tehan, as well as Simon Birmingham, and thank the Trump and Biden administrations, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, my good friends Boris Johnson and James Marape, Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien, and I pay tribute to the late and great Shinzo Abe and his successors, Prime Minister Suga and Kishida. The 2022 election may have provided an opportunity for Beijing to step back from their failed attempts at coercion, but we must not be deluded. Tactics change, but their strategy remains the same. We're not alone in waking up to this threat. Investors are now rightly pricing the risk of their investments in an authoritative communist China, while consumer advocates are waking up to human rights abuses and environmental degradation that infects these supply chains. This requires continued vigilance and the connection between all spheres of policy to create and protect supply chains, integrate and align our strategic and military capabilities so we can protect our sovereignty and counter the threat that is real and building. In Tehran, we find the funders, trainers and apologists for terrorists seeking to acquire the most deadly defence technology imaginable, nuclear weapons. Their green light for the Hamas terrorist attacks on innocents in Israel on October 7 is unforgivable. In response to such overt attacks, there can be no equivocation on where we stand as a representative democracy when another who has been such a great friend of Australia is under attack. There also can be no equivocation in calling out the anti-Semitism that has now occurred in this country to our shame, and other places across the Western Hemisphere in the wake of October 7. And to that end, I'm pleased to acknowledge the presence today of the Israeli ambassador, Amir Maimon, in the chamber today. Am Yisrael Chai. And in Ukraine, fighting continues to rage 2 years after Russia's illegal invasion. I'm proud of our swift response to support Ukraine. This must continue and is, utilising every resource and capability we can reasonably provide. Ukraine may be a long way from Australia, but the implications of a Russian victory will reverberate just as quickly in our own hemisphere, emboldening again those who seek to challenge our region. So my third point, how do we stand? And on what ground? Well, on the very same ground that established our Western civilisation, that inspired and enabled the modern pluralist representative democracy we now enjoy. We stand on the values that build a successful, free society: individual liberty, the rule of law, equality of opportunity, responsible citizenship, morality, liberty of speech, thought, religion and association. All of these stem from the core principle of respect for individual human dignity. So does representative democracy, and even market-based capitalism. This is a unique Judeo-Christian principle. It is about respecting each other's human dignity, through our creation by God's hand in God's image for God's glory, where each human life is eternally valued, is unique, is worthy, is loved, and is capable. This is the very basis for our modern understanding of human rights. With the advance of secularism in Western society, we may wish to overlook these connections or even denounce them. But the truth remains. Human rights abuses were once called crimes against God, not just humanity. And they are, and they remain so. These truths are not self-evident, as some claim. As history and nature tells a very different story. They are divinely inspired. You don't need to share my Christian faith to appreciate the virtue of human rights. I'm not suggesting you do. But equally, we should be careful about diminishing the influence and the voice of Judeo-Christian faith in our Western society, as doing so risks our society drifting into a valueless void. In that world, there is nothing to stand on. There is nothing to hold on to, and the authoritarians and autocrats win. So in the increasing Western embrace of secularism, let us be careful not to disconnect ourselves from what I would argue is our greatest gift and most effective protector of our freedoms, the Judeo-Christian values upon which our liberty and society was founded. Even if you may not believe, it would be wise to continue to understand, respect and appreciate this important link and foundation. So to conclude, you'll be pleased to note a warning about politics, where I've spent most of my professional life, as most of us here have. I know that all political philosophies and ideologies, including my own, are imperfect and regularly confounded by events outside our control. Experienced this firsthand leading Australia through the global pandemic. In my experience, the practice of politics is largely about contesting which approaches are less imperfect than others. In my view, those are those of the Liberal Party, and then trying to humbly appreciate and compensate for their imperfections. It's like Winston Churchill's famous line, to paraphrase, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. While a noble calling, politics can only take you so far and government can only do so much. You can say the same thing about the market. You won't find all the answers there either. And you won't find it in unrestricted libertarianism and more command and control communism. In the Liberal Party, we have always believed in how great Australians can be rather than governments, with the true test being how we are able to enable Australians to realise their own aspirations. I suspect that much of our dissolution with politics today and our institutions is that we have put too much faith in them. At the end of the day, the state and the market are just run by imperfect people, like all of us. While politics may be an important and necessary place for service, I would also warn against it being a surrogate for finding identity, ultimate meaning and purpose in life. There are far better options than politics. In The Dignity of Difference, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote that the great tragedies of the 20th century came when politics was turned into a religion, when the nation, in the case of fascism or system communism, was absolutised and turned into a god. So, Mr Speaker, I leave this place not as one of those timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I leave having given all in that arena, and there are plenty of scars to show for it. While I leave nothing of my contributions on that field, I do believe that in that arena will always remain any bitterness, disappointments or offences that have occurred along the way. I leave this place appreciative and thankful, unburdened by offences, and released from any bitterness that can so often haunt post-political lives. This is due to my faith in Jesus Christ, which gives me the faith to both forgive but also to be honest about my own failings and shortcomings. During my time as Prime Minister, the power and necessity of forgiveness was demonstrated to me most profoundly by the Abdallah and Saker families, whose children were taken from them, and they found the strength in their faith to forgive. For those who perhaps may feel a bit uncomfortable with my Christian references and scripture references here or at other times, I can't apologise for that, because of what it says in Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And in 2 Timothy 1:17, I am not ashamed, for I know what I believe and in whom, and I am convinced that he is able to protect what I have entrusted to him until that day. So in that vein, let me quote you one last scripture in this place as an encouragement to all who continue to serve. 2 Thessalonians 2:16. Now may our Lord Jesus Christ himself and our God and our Father, who has loved and given us eternal comfort and good hope by grace, comfort and strengthen your hearts in every good work and deed. Thank you all those who have joined me here today or are listening elsewhere for your kind attention. And as always, up Cronulla.